And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We are going to talk about the Steelers' schedule release. That's going to the big topic this week. Shayne, by this time next week, we'll know everything about the schedule. We already know mostly everything about the schedule as long as these leaks are accurate. So we're going to get to those today. In some of the biggest games on the schedule and a brutal stretch of games towards the end of the season that we'll talk about as well. So let's start with the news today, though, Shayne, and we'll kind of skip the schedule release stuff now, and we'll do that as an entire segment at the end. So let's hit on a few things that have happened over the past week before we get to the big news for today. The Steelers have signed cornerback Anthony Averett. This is an interesting decision to me just because you're looking at a guy that hasn't played an NFL game since I think it was week 11 of 2022. He hasn't played a special team snap since week 10 of 2021. And so now you're adding a cornerback who turns 30 years old this season, who he does have some slot ability, has been banged up with injuries. I'm not sure if this is the option, Shayne, that the Steelers particularly need from that slot cornerback position, but it's more than what they had before.
That's my thing, is I think that this signing is just, they felt like this guy has, obviously potential to come in and maybe man the slot if he is ready to go and is prepared to play again. He has some experience in the NFL. They just don't have a ton of guys on the roster right now that have legit NFL experience, right? You have Joey coming off his rookie season. You have the Darius Rushes of the world. Corey Trice missed his entire rookie year. Like, there's just not a ton of guys that you can ask to do different things, both special teams wise and also on defense. Whereas with him, you do have some experience there at least. So I think they're hoping they can kind of strike gold on a really low tier signing. But more than likely, this is a guy who's just not going to be on the team by the time the season starts.
Yeah, and it's hard to see the upside in this particular signing because the last time he did play on it was with the Raiders in 2022. He missed the entire season last year. He allowed 134.7 passer rating, if I recall. And so it was not exactly the best. I mean, that's great. One factor. I have people that work with the Raiders who told me that they were not pleased with his performance when he last played. The season before that, he was with the Ravens and he had a good year. And so, but again, that's 3 years removed from that. And the guy turns 30 years old this season. I'm not going to get my hopes up for this move. Like, I think he's got to make the team type of thing first before we figure out what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
I would prefer a bigger upgrade than this, obviously, but the cornerback market is pretty dry when you're looking for slot options right now. And so I'll be interested to see if the Steelers will try to poach somebody else off of a practice squad roster, if they're going to try to make a trade for a cornerback. Teams aren't really handing out cornerbacks very easily. And so this is
not
one
really.
And we questioned it during the draft, and I'm still okay with everything that went down.
Yeah.
But not finding that slot cornerback, it does make you wonder, what is the option going to be for them here? Because right now it's like you've got a veteran in Anthony Averett who hasn't played football in quite some time. And you've got a undrafted rookie in Beanie Bishop. And what else can you do there to deploy the slot position?
That's kind of my issue. Is as much as I like their draft overall, would I have liked them to use one of those late round picks on a flyer at slot? Like, probably.
Daquan Hardy.
Yeah, I mean, you know how I felt about him. Yeah, you know how I felt about Daquan Hardy. I think he could play the slot right now. Maybe not at like a high level, but he could do it. I mean, he did it for a ton of snaps at Penn State. Like, we just don't have somebody who we can say for sure is a guy that is going to be able to do that. We just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess we'll find out later on. And as we get into training camp, the Steelers have been involved in Treylon Burks trade rumors this week. Those are kind of heating up. It's not hard to see why there might be a connection there. I don't know if Tennessee is willing to deal him, but theoretically they would be, because they have DeAndre Hopkins on the roster. They signed Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd this offseason. And so Burks is kind of the odd man out here. I know they've got an old receiving core overall. Burks is kind of the young upside guy, if you will. But being fourth on the roster now, it makes it seem like maybe they would just kind of cut their losses at this point, be willing to ship him for maybe a late day 2, early day 3 type pick, like a 4th roundish pick is what Bill Barnwell of ESPN projected. Would you be up for the Steelers doing a trade for Treylon Burks. I know that it hasn't been pretty for him. He hasn't stayed healthy yet. He is a 24-year-old receiver with that big body, big frame, some blocking ability, and he's got 2 years left on his rookie contract.
I wouldn't be willing to part with anything more than like a 5, just because I don't know if this guy can actually play. That's just what it ultimately comes down to. If I don't know that you can play and that you're going to have a solidified role, I'm not willing to give up anything more than a late round pick. And I just don't know for the Titans, like, if that makes sense, because yes, he's been disappointed. He's had injuries, but DeAndre Hopkins is not exactly young. Calvin Ridley, weirdly enough, isn't very young either for how, recently he's been drafted. And with, the same thing with Tyler Boyd, these guys are not like the young core of receivers that they're going to go into the future with. This is a receiver core that's built to show whether Will Levis can play football or not. Like, that's what this receiving core is all about. It's like, okay, if you can't show good stuff with this receiving core, then you probably aren't a good quarterback. But even then, they have to have a plan past that. And Burks being 24 years old, a former first-round pick, I'd like to think they want to try to work him in and, like, at least allow him to go out there and try to win a role of some kind, even if it is just receiver 4. In this offense without Derrick Henry now, maybe that is going to be something that gets significant targets, right? Because they did add Tony Pollard, but he wasn't great last year. They do have the rookie running back they had last year. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. But this is an offense that needs pass-catching weapons. So to give one away that you spent a first-round pick on, they probably want more than I'd be willing to give for him.
Yeah, I get that for sure. And I don't know, like, part of me thinks, well, if you're willing to go out and sign Tyler Boyd and Calvin Ridley and pair them with DeAndre Hopkins, you want Levis to work out. Maybe you don't have a lot of faith in Burks.
Or they might not. Yeah.
Maybe they want to move in a different direction with a new coaching staff. And so I'll be interested to see if anything happens with that. I would be more open, Shayne, personally. I think I would be more open to this type of trade than I would be for trading for an old player or one that's on a bad contract. To me, I think there's almost more intrigue than Courtland Sutton. Like, what you're getting with the 29-year-old Courtland Sutton, who just doesn't have any yak ability and who has a significantly more expensive contract. And so if I can give up the same draft pick for a chance that Burks maybe becomes something, I'm almost more intrigued by that. I'm always kind of thinking future minded here. And maybe he ends up being someone you can pair with Pickens for a couple of years as that outside receiver there. Yeah. All right. Next thing on the dock here, ESPN projects the Steelers to finish dead last in the AFC North. Where have we seen this before, Shayne?
Oh, for
it's
a
only
while.
Like 3-4 years running.
Yeah, for a while now.
So 7.9 wins is the over-under for the Steelers this season, according to ESPN, and where they have their win total projected. If this was a betting odd total, Shayne, I'm betting the over. I'm betting the over.
Yeah, see, the problem with this, and I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine about this recently, is I understand from if you're just looking at, like, if you had no past history of this team, if you're just looking at the 4 teams in the AFC North right now, and you're going down the rosters, and you're looking, and and then you get all the information for all the players, I could understand looking at these 4 rosters and saying, the Steelers might have the weakest overall roster. I can understand that because the Browns have really thrown a ton of assets into important positions. We know what the Bengals are capable of with a healthy Joe Burrow. We know what the Ravens are capable of, despite the fact we consistently beat them, which is really funny to me still, that we're like the one team they can't beat with this version of the Ravens. But at the end of the day, you could throw all that out with this team half the time because they're going to probably win 4 out of the 6 games in the division, and at least 3. That's just what we do. Now, can I give you a reason other than the fact that just Mike Tomlin figures out a way to do it and the players figure out a way to do it? Not really. It doesn't make a lot of sense a lot of the time when we do that. Look at the Ravens games last year. One game, we play a fully healthy, essentially, Ravens team, and we find a way to beat them. And then the second, we barely beat them. And in the second game, when we need to win and get in the playoffs, we beat them with their B team barely also. Like, we kind of just win games the same way all the time. Now, this might be a little bit different this year, but it's more upside with this team than I think there's been for the past 3 years. So to still project us to have, I could see if they projected 9 wins in last place because they just think the AFC North is that insane, which is possible. It's kind of pretty much what happened last year almost. Then I would be like, okay, I get it. But when are we going to stop doing the thing where we project less than 9 wins for this team now that there's 17 games? This Tomlin just doesn't have losing seasons. No matter how you feel about that stat, no matter because whether you think it means nothing, whether you think it's whatever, it's still true. And
Yeah.
until I'm not betting on this being the version of the team that he can't get 9 wins with. I'm just not betting that at this point.
Yeah, and if you are a betting person and you see that the Steelers are projected to have a below 500 record
Let's go
these
ahead and
past,
bet.
I think
Yeah,
like
let's go ahead and
4
bet
years
the
in a row,
over.
you would win
Yeah.
money every time because they just happen to get there. 9 or 10 wins, they somehow make it happen. Even with the lowest projected win total, I trust them to do just that. And if they do
Right.
finish last in the AFC North, Shayne, I think it's probably with 9 wins. And I think it means that the rest of
That's
the
the point.
division has
Yeah.
just crushed it because it's so hard to bet against this team in that streak that they had going. Sure, you might not be 5-1 in the division this year. Some of those games could swing the other way, and I would expect it to. But it's so hard to think that they're actually like a 7 or an 8 win team until you see it happen. And their schedule's hard, so we'll get to that. And I've got my game by game predictions. I'll save that for next week when we go over the full in detail schedule. But that is where ESPN has them right now. And before we get to that schedule release and everything that we know so far, which is all but like 3 games on the schedule
so far, yeah.
Let's talk about Zach Frazier, Shayne. We've been scouting every draft pick of the Steelers. We're on the second round pick right now, pick 51 overall. Zach Frazier seemed like a really easy selection for fans in the media alike. Like Steelers have a huge need at center. This talent happens to line up with the need very, very well in the second round. I was lower on Frazier than most people. I had him 47 overall on my board. I did not like him as a first round candidate, but I could absolutely get behind him in the second round at pick 51. And so I think that for me, it came between a toss up of who I would have chosen between Zach Frazier and A.D. Mitchell, who was somehow still on the board right there. I think Mitchell's the more talented player.
Yeah.
The character stuff that he was flagged for does scare me a little bit. I think that Frazier is the safest option overall. And I do not fault the Steelers for running to the podium with that selection. I think that was a pretty easy one. And it was worth noting that this is the selection that they had it reportedly reached out to the 49ers to inquire about a Deebo Samuel trade to see what the asking price would be. And then they ended up just picking Frazier with the selection, which I think is a solid move overall.
Yeah, I think this because of where they got him specifically. Like I did think the first round conversation was very rich for him. He was in the late 30s on my board. I do like him as a center prospect, and I think centers in general do get undervalued a lot in the draft just because it feels like they're not the most important position, which is true to a certain degree. But I think it's kind of the same thing for me where with linebackers and running backs and things like that, where if you can get a premium one, they do matter a ton. It's just that the rest of the kind of grouping of those players matter a little bit less down the board. Like if you get if you have the 20th best running back, you don't want to use a ton of assets to get the 12th best running back to upgrade that. Like there's not as much of a difference between those players as receiver or quarterback or cornerback. Like that's kind of the biggest problem for centers, and that's one of the reasons we saw him fall to where he did, but it's also the right value, I think, for him. I think there is some issues in his game. We'll talk about that make him not quite as good as some of the other center prospects that has been talked about as first round potential picks who also didn't go in the first round.
Yeah, absolutely. I like your assessment of that. So let's get into it. We're going to talk about Frazier's strengths, his weaknesses, a projected role on the Steelers, and then we're going to give an NFL player comparison as well. I always like doing that. I think that people kind of appreciate that when you dive deep enough into the tape that you can offer a respectable player comparison. Like this is who this guy could be in the NFL if everything turns out well. And I can even give, like last time, Shayne, I can give a high end, a low end. Who is he most likely to be? And then again, schedule release stuff coming up. So stay with us for that. All right. Frazier's strengths. This is from my scouting report that was just released. He's got a squatty square frame with excellent leverage as a pass protector and a run blocker. Massive, powerful hands. I mean, those hands are almost 11 inches. And you can tell how much grip strength he has in those. Grip strength is actually something that's measured at the combine, but we don't get those numbers.
Yeah, we don't get those numbers. Yeah.
With great torque on defensive linemen. Impressive technician. He knows where to be with little wasted movements. He loves to drive defenders into the turf when finishing run blocks. He's got a great feel for pressure that is coming from where help is needed. Good hand placement with his punches. Loads of experience starting at center, over 2,500 snaps since 2021 at the position. and gives some ground in pass protection, but stalls out defenders relatively quickly. Those are my strengths that I noticed from watching Frazier. And again, I've watched hours of this guy's tape from early in the pre-draft process, just knowing that he was going to be on their radar probably in the second round. And that's ultimately what happened. So anything that you agree with, disagree, Shayne, and anything that you would add?
I definitely agree. I think the biggest thing for him and why he ultimately was the right fit at center, I think for us too, is one, the experience level. We need this guy to be able to play right now, right? We did not have anybody to play this position if he's not able to play it, right? Like that's kind of one of the bigger reasons why I think they didn't make a move for like a Jackson Powers-Johnson. Maybe if they liked him a lot to move up to get him, they felt like, as good as he could be, he doesn't have the same level of experience at the center position that Zach Frazier has. And then you also talk about his ability on the field as far as his experience. You could tell he's an experienced player because he is going to be able to handle stunts. He's going to be able to figure out where he needs to go to help. And that's something that Mason Cole had a lot of issues with, this time with the Steelers, something that we definitely wanted to clear up. This pass protection has not been great, partly because guys sometimes don't really know where to go and where to help. And especially with all the young guys we added, like having a guy that is young, but also prepared to handle the more kind of, the minutia of the position that maybe Jackson Powers-Johnson wouldn't be as good at. That's, I think, really important for him. And you talked about the strength, like the grip strength, especially. There's a whole lot made about him being a wrestler. Like we get it. Yeah. Like it's really cool when an offensive lineman are wrestlers. I get it. But it does translate some skills, right? Like having the ability to latch on to guys, to be able to kind of overpower them. That is where he wins. And whenever he can do that, even NFL caliber, defensive tackles and defensive linemen aren't going to be able to handle that well. So.
Yeah, and I can't remember what his high school wrestling record was.
I don't remember either.
It was like
very good, though.
56-2 or something.
It's always something insane. I'm like, how do you what's going on?
All right, let's get to, we got a chat here from R Barley 18. I think Frazier is better than people think he is already. Both guards at West Virginia University were less than desired. So I get where you're coming from here, but it's hard for me to think that Frazier is underrated when on Marcus Mosier's NFL draft consensus board that ranks the average of all the top draft experts, Frazier's 36th. I mean, that's bordering on being like a first round player. So yeah, I don't think that he's underrated per se, but I think that he has a chance to prove why he can be potentially one of the top centers in the NFL.
I think he ended up being properly rated where he ended up going. I think that was kind of the thing. Like, even though I would have been willing to take him in the probably late 30s, early 40s, just because for a team that needs a center desperately like the Steelers, I would have been okay with them trying to get him in that range, even if they had to move up. It's nice that they didn't have to. Like, I think this is a better value for the player for sure. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Shayne, let's get to the weaknesses of Zach Frazier here. These are things that I noticed that that I didn't love about his game. Some can be fixed. Some might not be able to be fixed because of certain limitations. So powerful for his size, but his frame is fully maxed out. Like, I don't think this guy is getting any bigger. He's a small block radius due to his squatty stature and pretty short arms. Even though he's got big hands, you can only do so much when you are kind of short, square, and condensed like that. Just an average athlete compared to starting NFL centers. I know that he was testing on that recently recovered broken leg, but I don't see it on film either. I don't see the freaky athletic traits on film. Needs to anchor better in pass protection. You can see, especially if you watch the Texas game, he gives a lot of ground there. And that was a couple of years ago, but he can get caught off guard that way. I think where it's most noticeable, Shayne, for me, is you get like a linebacker stunting in and somebody that can convert speed to power and just get into his chest. It takes him longer to stall those players out. He needs to anchor better. I said that one. Average lateral movement skills when blocking in space. You would hope that he would be a little bit better athlete laterally, I think, than you expect him to be for that size. He's solid at everything, but great at nothing. This is how I used this comparison before for him. I'm not using it as a knock. I still think that is going to make him a good player in the NFL, but he just doesn't have that defining trait to me. It's not athleticism. It's not his size. It's not necessarily his power, though he can drive people off the ball at times. I think that he's kind of that good at everything, great at nothing type player. And I think he's going to end up being a really solid NFL starter because of it.
Yeah, and I agree. The biggest problem I have and the biggest concern I have with him is just the anchor and pass protection because more and more, like we're seeing interior defensive players be
Mhm.
drafted higher, more of those guys coming out, them getting paid. Like the interior rush is where the NFL is going, right? So if you're going to have a center who's going to have to deal with that, ideally you want somebody who can handle somebody one-on-one in pass protection with specifically power because you're dealing with interior players in that situation, right? So for him to struggle with that a little bit, I do hope he can get better at that. Maybe you can do some technique stuff with him. Again, size wise, he's kind of maxed out, so that is probably the only way you're going to improve that is just redistributing some of that weight or trying to work on core strength more and more. But at the end of the day, like he does just have kind of shorter arms. He's not necessarily a small center, especially nowadays because you see so many smaller centers, but he's not this big hulking center either. He's kind of in that in between range of like he's not a great athlete, but he's a good one. He's not a great sized player. He does not have great size, but he has good size. And that does come back to what you said. Like he is a really good prototype, like starting NFL center, but he doesn't have those elite traits that could get him up into that stratosphere of like being a top 3 player at his position. I just don't think that's really in the cards for him. And that's okay in the second round. That's kind of
Mhm.
the thing, right? Because I've seen some people, and I'm probably not stealing a comp here from you. I doubt a lot of people try to comp him to like Creed Humphrey, right? That's come out recently, or
Mhm.
even like a JS or John Michael Smith last year.
Yeah.
I just don't think he has quite the movement skills of those guys, obviously, and I just don't think he has the elite traits that those guys have. But I think he could still be a really good starting center, like we've been saying.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And centers, I mean, you can get good centers who are small, like Jason Kelsey, like Tyler Linderbaum. You can get good centers who are big, like Travis Frederick was, and it was an all-pro center before his career ended. And so if I go through some of the measurements right here, if you're wondering where he stacks up in terms of percentiles, 6'2" and 5/8 is 20th percentile. So definitely on the shorter side for a center. You don't necessarily want a big, tall center anyway. And
No,
so,
not
and so
necessarily
that's
unless
fine.
they're a great athlete, where it doesn't really hinder them. Yeah.
True. The weight is already 87th percentile, 313 pounds. Is part of the reason why I think that his frame is really maxed out to the extent that it's going to be. I don't think he's probably ever going to play any heavier than that. The wingspan is 48th percentile, so a fairly average wingspan. Arm length, though, only 32 and a quarter. It's 32nd percentile. Hand size, like you said on there, I see Jay dropping in the comments here. Hand size 10 and 7/8, almost 11-inch hands.
Mm-hmm.
The grip strength does matter when you can get your hands inside somebody's pads like that and you don't let go. That's a good trait to have. And look, there's no question, I think from you or I, Shayne, that he is from day one is going to be an upgrade over what
Oh
the
yeah.
Steelers have had these past several years. Not a question with Kendrick Green. I very much doubt that it's going to be a question even with Mason Cole these past 2 seasons. I think he's an upgrade over that for sure. What's the extent of that? And that's what we're going to talk about now. So let's talk about his projected role from the Steelers. Shayne, we know he's a center. I
Mm-hmm.
think that part is very much set in stone. Could he play guard? I guess in a pinch,
I
like
think in
he's
a pinch
definitely
he could.
undersized if you put him as a
Yeah.
guard at that point. Center's definitely going to be his best role. I don't think there's any question about that in my mind. And so it comes down to, when is he going to start, Shayne? Do you think that this is a plug and play player? Like, will the Steelers give Nate Herbig a fighting chance to do something, at least have him like running with the ones in training camp? Or is this Zach Frazier's job just from the gate?
I have to assume, as much as they like to try to do this thing where they're like, oh, well, we have a veteran and everything else. I think
Mhm.
it was a little bit purposeful that they didn't bring in any major center before the draft. I think that they did expect to come out of the draft with a starting caliber one and wanted to be able to plug him in if they felt necessary, right? Now, what I think is possible, and this is no offense to Herbig, it's just I do think he should be a guard if he's going to play. I think if we see in camp that he's struggling or if they don't think he's ready, we could see them go to the free agent market or go to the trade market to find somebody they think can play center or that has played center more than maybe Herbig has to come in and kind of settle that position until he's ready. But I have a hard time thinking he's going to struggle in camp. I think he's going to be the player that I
Mhm.
think we all expect him to be, which is a really good, if not probably not great player kind of from the get-go. Again, this is a player you take in the second round because you're confident he can play right now. He has all the experience. He doesn't have any of the things you have to like necessarily work on in the sense of being able to play. There's stuff he can improve on as he goes along, but his ability to come in and play right now, to me, really isn't in question. It is just more about the ceiling of the player. But I think that's why you kind of take Mason McCormick later on, just to have more options at both center and guard, down the stretch if he doesn't maybe hit a ceiling that they're comfortable with. But at least from the get-go, I have to think he's going to be given every opportunity to start.
Yeah, I would think so too. And I'm going to project him as this day one center for the Steelers. I think they like him enough as a prospect. I don't know exactly where he landed on Pittsburgh's board, but I do know that they liked him a lot. And that was pretty evident throughout the process. He fits the scheme really well. I don't think that and personally, Shayne, I wouldn't mess around with it. Like, not that I don't think that Herbig deserved a chance. Like, I think that Herbig has been any time from the Eagles to the Jets till now. I think whenever he's gotten a chance, I think he's been a pretty solid player.
He's been good.
And I feel bad for him. The guy's only 25 years old still after 5 NFL seasons.
Yeah,
so he turned 26 this year, but
he's got time.
He was really young coming into the NFL, like his brother Nick. And so I would have been fine giving him that chance. But now that you drafted Frazier in the second round, I think we should just go ahead and turn the page. Let's start developing that chemistry with everybody on the offensive line, assuming that Frazier looks at least on par with what Herbig does in camp. And so I project him as that day one starter. I think he plays out a full rookie contract and possibly beyond. Maybe he gets that second deal. Maybe he's the guy that's here for 8 or so years. And so if that's the case, then you're taking this pick that I think was maybe hitting a double, and you're hitting a home run with it if he can last that long with the Pittsburgh and do so at a high level of play. And so I don't think that's out of the question. I think that maybe at his best, maybe he borders on being like a Pro Bowl talent. And
I can see that.
And at his worst, maybe he's a guy that just plays one contract and the Steelers go to replace him. So let's talk about that next, Shayne, and then we will get to all the schedule release stuff coming right up here in just a minute. NFL player comparisons for Zach Frazier. I'll let you go if you have any. If not, Shayne, I will go ahead and share the ones that I have in the article that's coming out. And so I gave a high end, a low end, and a most likely comparison for Zach Frazier. But what do you have?
So I will say, obviously, the one that I mentioned earlier that people want to say is Creed Humphrey. I just don't see that. I don't think he has the traits that
I don't think that's fair.
I don't
Humphrey
think
was a 100th percentile testing athlete.
Exactly.
As well, so.
He's not the same type of player. Unfortunately, just isn't that case. Now, somebody that I hope that I think he could become, just from especially from a strength standpoint, David Andrews of the New England Patriots.
Okay.
I think similar size players. Yeah. He's a little bit heavier than Andrews, but Andrews also 6'3", a little bit shorter. Been a better run blocker than pass blocker throughout his career, and I kind of expect the same thing from Frazier. That type of player that, Andrews obviously had some really good years early in his career, starting to slow down now. I can see that very similar type of profile for Frazier, where he starts off really well, and because he does have a lot of experience already, is a little bit older, I could see him kind of having that 7-8 year peak and then kind of needing to move on from him from there. I'd love if he could get a player as good as Andrews has been for the Patriots. That's kind of the guy that I'm hoping he could become at some point.
Yeah, for sure. If he's Andrews, sign me up for that.
Yes.
I would have ran my card in for the podium as well. And I think that that's reasonable. I think that they are very similar in a lot of ways. So let's start with my high end comparison here for Zach Frazier. If things go really well, he hits his peak, I think that he could be Eric Wood. Eric Wood's played a little while ago for the Buffalo Bills.
Yep, that's
long-time football player, very similar stature, kind of that shorter, squattier, heavy type center, but just a solid football player. Didn't have a particular niche in his game, but just very solid at everything, which is kind of the word that I use to describe Frazier. If you can have that career, that would be an absolute win for the Steelers. My low-end comparison for Zach Frazier is AQ Shipley. And I saw this one from Lance Zierlein of NFL.com.
Yes.
I kind of like that comp because they are similar in terms of their stature. Shipley ended up being a guy who would start for a little while and kind of bounce around.
He's kind of in and out of the lineup,
in and out of the lineup, more of a journeyman type guy. And I can see that being a possibility for Frazier as well if he doesn't live up to expectations. And again, similar type traits. My most likely player comp, and I know that they are different in some ways in terms of in terms of maybe what their best scheme is, but I have Lloyd Cushenberry. And the reason why I have him is because Cushenberry was also shorter, a little bit heavier. Now, Cushenberry has longer arms than what Frazier does. But I think that, to me, I'm looking at that range that he can be in. I think Cushenberry is the 10th to 12th best center maybe in the NFL. I think that Frazier will probably fall in a very similar range of that.
Right.
I view them similarly as prospects coming out. Just like Frazier, I think that Cushenberry didn't really have a niche to his game. It wasn't athletic traits. It wasn't dominant run blocking ability. It wasn't like rapid feet as a pass protector. He was kind of just good at everything and great at nothing, kind of like Frazier is. And so very similar. I can see a very similar career path. And Cushenberry is a guy who just got signed for, I think it was like $12.5 million in free agency.
Got a good amount of money.
So he got a good second contract. Now, it didn't come with his original team in Denver, but he ended up getting signed by the Titans. But I can see that happening with Frazier as well. I think he can be a guy that maybe is teetering at the end of his contract on whether or not the Steelers should kind of throw a lot of money at him, or if they should kind of just let him walk in free agency and hit the reset button and draft another guy. Like, I think that's probably his most likely route. I'd like it to be Eric Wood. I think Cushenberry is still a win. If he's still Cushenberry, that's still a win in my mind.
Yeah.
You're getting a quality, respectable starting center who can give you at least 4 years and more, depending on whether the Steelers want to give him that second contract. So if that is a comparison that you guys agree with, disagree, go ahead and drop it in the chat. We'd love to hear your opinions about that.
Chats I wanted to throw out there real quick.
Let's go for it.
Sticking with them. This one here, maybe I read into this too much, but I've heard little about this being a zone scheme team than a gap power team when discussing O-line. And I don't think Smith is going anywhere anytime soon. So that is one thing I will say. Frazier would not have been the best wide zone scheme fit for me. Now, granted, there weren't a ton of guys who you can plug in as a starter that fit that scheme. So that doesn't really matter that much to me, although I do think that he would be better in a power gap scheme. And I'm expecting, I shouldn't say expecting, I'm hoping that Arthur Smith does include more of that type of run game in his run game now that he's in Pittsburgh, just because we're more built to do that than the wide zone, at least in some ways, especially with Najee being there still and everything else, which, again, that is maybe why the fifth-year option wasn't picked up, because they want to see if he can do wide zone. But in general, I'm hoping to see him still include some of the stuff that we've had a lot of success with the power scheme. But he is probably just going to lean towards his wide zone. So it is an interesting fit with Frazier.
Yeah, and Shayne, I kind of expect it to be maybe somewhat of a hybrid between the two. My worry with that, because I've heard that from others before, suggesting the same thing based on their personnel and keeping Pat Myers, our offensive line coach. So I wouldn't be shocked if they did have some sort of hybrid. My concern with just not picking one or the other is, like, are you putting too much on the plate of this suddenly young offensive line outside of Isaac Seumalo? Like, can they handle that switching back and forth between kind of two different running styles there? So I will be interested for sure to see what they ultimately decide to go with. I think that Frazier is scheme versatile enough, obviously, that he will be fine in either scheme. And so I think that there's a case to be made that maybe this isn't, if the Steelers are running a true wide zone offense, maybe it's not the best. Maybe he would be better in gap. Right. But if they run a hybrid of both, maybe that's what's best for Frazier. And so it's hard to say before knowing exactly what the plan is on the offensive line there. All right. Anything else you want to get to on Frazier before we move on to the schedule release?
I think we're good there.
All right, here we go. If you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Still Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. And if you are enjoying this content, please just hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends about it. We would love to get as many listeners as possible. All right, Shayne, let's break this down. Everything we know so far about the Steelers 2024 schedule. And we are using sources. We are using leaked data from respectable sources, I should say. This isn't just the CT ESPN network out there. So these are pretty accredited here, what we have so far. And Shayne, while we are recording this, these last ones might come in. So if you guys are here joining us in the live chat and you see a couple of these weeks that we didn't address and you want to drop them in there, feel free to do so, and we'll double check that and we'll find out. But we are going to kind of take this week by week. Let's go through every game on the Steelers schedule, Shayne, and then we'll talk about maybe the biggest storylines that we can draw from this. And I think that one of them for sure is going to be just the brutal slate down the stretch for the Steelers. If this ends up being the way the schedule actually is, boy, they better have a good record going into that because it's looking rough. So let's kick it off. Week 1, Shayne. The Steelers are going to be in Atlanta to play the Falcons. I was not surprised to see this. Like, I kind of thought, for me, it was like it came down between the Falcons and the Broncos. I could see them doing the Broncos as well because of the Russell Wilson storyline. You want to catch the Steelers while Wilson is still going to be the quarterback there. We don't know for sure how long it'll last. And I think the NFL wanted to be safe rather than sorry there. We get the Broncos in week 2, though. And so the Steelers will be back-to-back road games to start the season off. And so definitely a lot of traveling in their future at the beginning of the season. In week 3, they're going to be at home for their opener against Jim Harbaugh's Chargers now. And then in week 4, they are back on the road again against the Indianapolis Colts, a game that they did not fare very well in last year. They ended up getting blown out in that contest, even though they kept it close for most of the game. And so 3 of the first 4 games on the road this year. Shayne, what do you make of this stretch of the schedule?
Well, if this is what we do here with the schedule, I think that ultimately the Steelers at Falcons is a really fun game to start the season for the Steelers because you get to have the Arthur Smith thing obviously going on, which granted, I don't know which it's a revenge game for who, because it's really probably the Falcons who want revenge on Arthur Smith for what happened there, more so than Arthur Smith wants revenge on them. But however you want to look at it, it's a fun matchup there. You get to see the new look Falcons with probably Kirk Cousins, you hope, assuming he's all good to go health-wise. But, they did draft a quarterback, which is still crazy to me, which I'm not going to harp on that right now. But that's a fun game to start the season. On the road, obviously, starting on the road, we're used to this. We never get the home openers. It feels like we never start the season at home. Week 2, obviously, you travel to Denver. Makes total sense. You assume Russell Wilson's going to be quarterback still. I kind of honestly would rather that not be the case. I kind of hope by the start of the season he is the quarterback, just because I'll think it'll be more fun that way. But no, I expect him to at least get the first few weeks, if not longer than that, no matter what happens. But so that should be a fun return for him, hopefully. Denver's a weird team. I don't really know if I think they're good at all or if I think they're terrible. I really don't know. It kind of depends on how much you think Bo Nix matters in this equation, which to me is not that much, at least early on. So that's definitely certainly fun. Chargers with Harbaugh, I have no idea what to expect from that team currently. I love what they did in the offseason and the draft, so they could be a really tough out even at home, or they could still be figuring stuff out and the receivers are not really there yet, and we kind of can just focus on the run game. It's really hard to say with that, so that should at least be a fun home opener, though. And then Colts, I am terrified of Anthony Richardson. That's kind of my takeaway from that game is if he's healthy and playing, I'm not a big fan of that. That's all I'm going to say about that.
So I think they are catching these games at a good time.
Yes,
I think,
they are.
for the most part, because this is going to be Kirk Cousins' first game with the Atlanta Falcons. He's not going to have all that time to develop that chemistry with his
fresh off the
wide receivers. And so if there's a time that you want to get, Cousins fresh off of an Achilles tear, maybe it's in the season opener. And so I know it's on the road. Is it bad, Shayne, if I kind of wish that Arthur Smith was the Falcons offensive coordinator for this game? I hope he does a lot better job in Pittsburgh. I think he did great with the Titans these last 3 years. In terms of points per game, I mean, he was just a tick above Matt Canada. And so I think things will go better in Pittsburgh. Yes. But I kind of wish that he was calling the shots in Atlanta. We'll see. Maybe it'll be worse over there now that he's left.
Yeah.
So week 2, again, I think you're catching the Broncos at a good time. You got Sean Payton, you got a rookie quarterback. I think that there's going to be there's a lot of moving parts over there that are going to have to mesh and gel. And I don't think that they're going to be at that point yet. I think that it's possible to look at that schedule and say, maybe the Steelers start off 2-0 in that slate. I never want to bet against Harbaugh in week 3. I know that even both Harbaughs, but Jim Harbaugh, I mean, I think Jim Harbaugh's won it was some crazy stat, 81% of his NFL head coach games, something going back to his time with the 49ers. You're getting early in the season, but Justin Herbert scares me too. I mean, this guy has put up points on the Steelers in the past. And so I could see that game going either way. The Steelers do get that one at home though. So I think they have a little bit of advantage there. Their receiving core is a mess. I know they drafted Ladd McConkey, but I really don't know what's going on outside of that to aid Herbert. They don't have Mike Williams. They don't have Keenan Allen. And so that can be a bit of a curve there for them at the beginning of the year. And then, like you said, the Colts, I'm scared of Anthony Richardson as well. Maybe you catch him early enough, fresh off of the season-ending injury, not a lot of time. And I'm scared of Shane Steichen. I think that he did an awesome job for them last year. He could be
a lot of money.
Yeah, he definitely did. I think he could be maybe the next in line of one of those really good, offensive-minded young head coaches like that. So, something to keep in mind there. Let's move on to the next stretch of games here. And Shayne, feel free to interrupt me if we get any chats that you need to chime in with as well.
There's a couple of things I wanted to throw out here. So just conversations kind of about the road games. I hear it's always back-to-back road games because of the fact they share parking with the Pirates. I've heard that a bunch too. I really don't know if it means anything because I think the NFL would just tell them too bad, figure it out. Like I really do think that's what it is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like it is weird how often we're starting on the road. So maybe there's something to that. Very much could be.
Honestly, I mean, I wonder if it comes into play too, like when the Pitt Panthers are out there, like when are they using the field? I'm sure that's part of it. Hey, at least they don't have to play on a baseball field like the old Raiders.
Yes, at least we don't have to do that. And then Atlanta was doing much more interesting schematic things because that is very true. It was more about like the quarterback play and him being too like also Smith being too weird about trying to get the ball to people in a way. It's hopefully he has less options of doing that in Pittsburgh. Let me put it that way. There's less.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to knock Smith before like I see him in action because again, we've seen really good Arthur Smith in Tennessee. We've seen not so good Arthur Smith in Atlanta the last 3 years. I'm using I always think in terms of anything football related, I always think that the most recent sample size is the most relevant. I think that's pretty much the case. Like it's hard to go back and say, well, 5 years ago, Arthur Smith was really good. Like I want to know, like, can he be good right now? And I do believe that Smith will be better in Pittsburgh. I think he's got more to work with. He's got obviously a quarterback that has done things before. And so I'm not going to knock him until we see him in action. He's going to be better than Matt Canada. There's no question in my mind. It's just how much better is he going to be than the last 3 years of Arthur Smith?
Exactly. How much better. So,
all right, let's move on to the next stretch of games here. Week 5, the Steelers versus the Cowboys. I was wondering when this would come. I thought there was a chance this might have been the Christmas game here. We'll get to that one in a little bit. And the Steelers are playing on Christmas this year. So I got to work Christmas. It stinks, Shayne. It's good and it's bad at the same time. Steelers versus Cowboys, Sunday Night Football in week 5. Week 6, the Steelers are on the road against the Raiders. Week 7, the Steelers are back at home against Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. Week 8, the Steelers are at home again against the New York Giants. What do you make of this stretch?
So the Cowboys game is interesting to me because I'm lower on the Cowboys this year than I've been in a while because I think they've kind of hit their ceiling last year. They lose Dan Quinn, obviously. I think the defense is going to take a slight step back overall. They still have a ton of talent, and Parsons is Parsons, and like so that's all great. But I do think there's a little bit more questions there than there's been with the change there. And I just think like this feels, and maybe it's not going to matter much this season, like in terms of the record, but more so past this year. It feels like the Dak McCarthy era of this team is possibly done. Like if they don't win, at least if they don't get to the NFC Championship and make it competitive in the NFC Championship, I don't know how you can bring everybody back. I don't know how you run it back with this core. And it's not so much about whether like Dak deserves it, because that's not really the question. It's more about whether the Cowboys should be continuing to try to do this thing where they're paying him a ton of money to try to make it work with this core, but they're just not quite getting it done. The coaching situation is also just a thing that has to be addressed at some point. Like McCarthy can win all the regular season games he wants. Kind of the same thing with Tomlin, right? Like we're kind of in that same thing where it's like you can continue to win games the regular season, but something has to eventually change in the playoffs. They have failed spectacularly in the playoffs, like unbelievably spectacularly in the playoffs. Like the Packers game last year, I'll never be able to forget that game. Just hilariously bad all around, like just devastating. So I don't really know how much I think, like, I don't know if this game is going to be like a premium game like people probably think it will be, because both of these teams obviously have questions, but I think the Cowboys are teetering on like full on, like we're going to have to change everything up mode, whereas the Steelers are trying to build back up a little bit here. Giants, week 8, I wanted to talk about here real quick. I don't know who the quarterback is going to be for that team by that point. So that's my biggest question is who's under center for that team, because if it's Daniel Jones, it doesn't move me. If it's Drew Lock, moves me a little bit more because I think he's more fun. I don't know if he's better necessarily, but I think he's more fun. So I think it's for them. It's just about, can they take advantage of Malik Neighbors' rookie? Can he be an explosive target to kind of get the passing game going? They just have a lot of questions still, so I'm not really sure if that's going to be a great game to watch kind of regardless. Raiders, I hate going to the Raiders. we know the history there for whatever reason. We can't beat that team for
Mhm.
some reason. And I like their team this year. I do. Like, I think Minshew's definitely kind of a weird decision to upgrade the quarterback position, but it is an upgrade over what they had last year. They were in the playoff race last year with the new head coach. So, like, it's definitely going to be a tough game regardless. It always is, even when they're bad. So that's a tough one. And then the Jets, again, who's playing quarterback? Is Rodgers healthy? Is he staying healthy? Is he being a presidential candidate? I don't know whatever he's doing, right? I don't know what his deal is going to be by that point of the season, but we'll just have to wait and see for that one.
Yeah, I mean, the Cowboys game, I think it always offers a level of intrigue. You're talking about the two most winning teams since the NFL merger. And so that's why I wouldn't have been surprised. And two huge market teams. And so I agree with you, though. The Cowboys very well could be on their downslide now with no Dan Quinn. Boy, they just got annihilated by Jordan Love and the Packers in that playoff game. So if there is one game that should be a freebie, nothing ever comes easy for the Steelers these days, Shayne. It's the Steelers hosting the Giants. And I don't care what week of the season this comes. The Giants are a train wreck of a football team. Daniel Jones is coming off an ACL tear. He's not very good to begin with. Like, they're just vastly more talented than that team.
Yeah, but Jay makes a good point. That Raiders Jets Giants stretch looks like a classic frustrating Tomlin point in the season.
It has the potential to be that.
It definitely could be. It's because it's one of two. It's either at the beginning of the year, or it's like either at the middle of the year or at the end of the year, right? Like last year was kind of more the end of the year, and then he picked it up at the last few games. But like at some point in that like week 8 to 14 stretch, we're going to have a few games where like, how are we losing to this team? And it just is what it is. We kind of expect that, but this definitely could be that point in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree with you with the Raiders thing. I hate traveling out to play the Raiders. For some reason, it never seems to go very well. I got to look up the history of that. I know the Steelers, they won that Ice Bowl game on Christmas Eve against the Raiders, but that was in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
They just, when they go that way, they just don't play very well for some reason. And then the Steelers Jets, I would expect Rodgers to be the quarterback. I mean, obviously he's got to stay healthy. Yeah. So, and I'm interested to see how good the Jets can be this year. Like, I think that they've got some talent on that roster where they could potentially be a threat if Rodgers comes back and looks like 80% of himself from the Packers. Like, it's possibility that that's a team that, and again, these Steelers and Jets could be fighting for one of those final playoff spots in the AFC. Like, it come down to something like that as well. All right, let's look at the next stretch of games that we have here, Shayne. Week 9 is the bye from what we've heard. Week 10, Steelers at Commanders. Week 11, we don't have a game for that yet. If you guys see one out there floating around on Twitter or whatever, you can go ahead and drop it to us. Week 12, Steelers at Browns. And so, Shayne, if there's something I'm thankful for this year on the schedule, the Steelers don't have that dreaded super early season bye. Last year, it was week 6, which meant that they had to go and play like 13 straight games plus playoffs without a break. So thankfully they get it in week 9. You get it basically the dead middle of the season. That's where I like it. Give me week 9 or week 10, something in that range. I'm satisfied with that. Steelers at Commanders. Again, nothing's a freebie. That team, I don't know what to make of it. Like, I don't know how much of an impact Dan Quinn's going to make right away. You're going to have a rookie quarterback. Although at this point in the season, like, Jaden Daniels is going to have a lot of time to get acclimated when you're not playing this team until week 10. Again, if this was one that they were playing very early in the season, I think that they would be just kind of completely in shambles. But who knows what they'll look like at that point. And then week 12, the Steelers at the Browns. And this is starting this late season stretch where we can get some challenging games here. The Browns have a good defense. I know everybody likes to harp on the Browns. I think that their talent is still pretty solid. It's all, to me, it all depends on Deshaun Watson. Like, if Watson, can he take that next step forward? He is not a $230 million quarterback at this rate.
No, so I agree with you. The bye, I wanted it to be closer to this area of the season. I was tired of the early season buys where, guys are already banged up before that typically, and then they get, a whole week off and then get to play 13 straight games. Like you said, it's tough. I think that's really good. The Commanders game, again, this is a team that I don't think is going to be competitive. I think that their goal is to try to reset this culture that's been so horrendous under Dan Snyder for so long with this new ownership group. I think that's what this season is about. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be competitive at all. Doesn't mean that they can't beat us, obviously, especially at home. But this is a game I think you have to kind of circle and go, we have to beat a rookie quarterback and a rookie head coach, even though Dan Quinn's been there before. That one to me just feels like one you have to win. And then the Browns game, it's the Browns at this point are so difficult for me because I love the roster for that team. I really do. I think the roster is one of the best built rosters from top to bottom in the league. I really do. Like you said, though, what are they getting out of the quarterback position? Because they've gotten nothing from really anybody except a few hot weeks from Joe Flacco. Like that's been the best quarterback play they've gotten since they've went in this direction with Watson. And at the end of the day, like you can say whatever you want about him, and I'm not going to harp on the personal stuff with him. He just has not been a good quarterback since he's returned to the NFL. He just hasn't been. That doesn't mean he won't be one. It doesn't mean that he can't get somewhat close to the version of himself that was worth $230 million. But he hasn't been. And to their credit, it hasn't destroyed the team. Like they've been able to make the playoffs last year, obviously lose the first game, but they've been competitive with that situation. It just makes you wonder if you're a Browns fan, like as much as they like the move at the time, like what would this team look like without spending $230 million on Deshaun Watson, where you had
all the resources,
right,
the draft capital.
Exactly. Finding a new quarterback that, could probably be at least at his level without costing all those picks. Like it is going to be if this version of the Browns, and not to harp on them too much, but if this version of the Browns do not do much of anything in terms of playoff success or obviously titles, this is going to be one of the bigger what ifs in their history. Is what would this team look like if they hadn't done that? And it's honestly, as much as I don't care for them, obviously, it is going to kind of be too bad, right? Like because this roster with a really good quarterback or just like less assets put in the quarterback would be a lot of fun. But
yeah. What if you had drafted Ben Roethlisberger, and what if you hadn't traded for Deshaun Watson? So you could definitely make a case why that was a terrible move. Like so far, there's no question. Right. It just depends on this is it. This is the year for him, and that's a wicked contract too that you can't really get out of. Yeah. Let's see. Anything else?
In the chat, we saw Baltimore week 11 is what
Baltimore week 11. Okay, yeah. Thanks for chiming in there. We'll try to get confirmation of that as well. Yeah. I know a lot of people will say too. A lot of fans will say, "Why are Steelers fans worried about their divisional games?" Or they went 5-1 in the division last year. Any one of those games could have swung the other way.
Literally any one of them.
Yeah.
Except for the one Bengals game. That was the only game where it was like
that was the one. The one where they actually stuck it to them, which they don't do very often. But and that's the case for a lot of divisional games. So would it surprise me if they were 3-3 in the division this year or 2-4? Like I think it's nothing is out of the realm of possibility when you're talking interdivisional games like that. The AFC North, it's always so tightly contested.
Yes.
And maybe they need to have a good record. We'll talk about that more next week, but maybe they need to have a winning record in the AFC North to make the playoffs because of the strength of schedule this year. So let's look at the next stretch that we've got here, Shayne. We've got in week 13, Steelers at the Bengals. Week 14 has not been announced as we're doing this. Week 15, Steelers at the Eagles. In week 16, Steelers at the Ravens. And this begins that really tough stretch of games here for the Steelers late in the season. This is hard. I mean, if Joe Burrow is healthy and playing well at the end of the year, Bengals certainly have something to play for. They're going to be they're going to be a competitor. I think the Bengals are really good when Burrow is healthy. The Eagles game, I mean, they got massacred the last time these two teams played. I mean, it wasn't particularly close, and Pickett kind of just padded his stats a little bit late in the game, but that was a blowout. And then the Ravens game, I know the Steelers are capable of beating the Ravens. They're capable of sweeping the Ravens. We've seen that before. But if they're getting Lamar Jackson, it can be different than getting Tyler Huntley. The Ravens botched an opportunity last year. In the game they played last year where Porter gave this team a chance by getting an interception. I don't know what they were doing at the end of that game. They could have put the game on ice. So they should not have won that game. But the Steelers took advantage of that opportunity. Regardless of how you slice it, sure, the Steelers can come away looking good from this stretch, but this is a hard slate of games here.
Yeah, and we'll get to the last game we know about after this one too. That makes it just that much harder. But yeah, depending on what this week 14 game ends up being, this is just a brutal stretch potentially. Like if these teams are even mostly healthy, this could easily be an 0-3, 0-4 stretch depending on week 14. And that's just the reality of it. Like as good as the Steelers are capable of being, we've seen them beat teams that they are clearly not better than. Like, let's just be honest about that. We're pretty good at that, as weird as it is. This is just a tough schedule. I mean, if the Bengals have Burrow healthy, we know what he's capable of. We know what he's done to us in the past when he's been able to be healthy. We know what the Ravens are capable of, despite the fact they can't find a way to beat us for whatever reason. whatever magic we have going there, we got to keep that going on. And then the Eagles, like, we're going, first of all, at the Eagles, which, obviously is close to a home game as you can get because it's still in the state, but, like, obviously very much not a home game. These teams this fan base do not exactly mesh well. It's just, that game is really important to me because if the Eagles return to kind of the Eagles that they were the 2 years prior and not the version of the Eagles we saw last year that kind of faltered down the stretch, they're going to be one of the tougher outs in the league, just straight up. That's just kind of what the talent signifies with them. So this is really, really brutal.
It is hard. I mean, you can see a scenario depending on what that week 14 game is. And we've got a question here from Jay as well. When is the first divisional game? It looks like it's week 11, like week 1 Falcons, week 2 Broncos, week 3 Chargers, week 4 Colts, week 5 Cowboys, week 6 Raiders, week 7 Jets, week 8 Giants, week 9 bye, week 10 Commanders. And then it looks like you're not getting your first divisional game until week 11. When is the last time this has happened, Shayne?
I don't know.
That's a great point because I know a lot of times the Steelers will open the season like against the Browns or sometimes against the Bengals. I went and looked at that recently, and a lot of times you open the season with a divisional game. The fact that you're not getting one till this late, it makes me wonder. I mean, obviously we don't know every team's schedule at this point, but it makes me wonder if the league is kind of shifting gears and they want a lot of like these divisional games coming late season just to kind of amp up the volume.
Maybe, which I definitely wouldn't be. I mean, I'm a little bit opposed to it just because I feel like it adds like more injury potential to those games where it might not be as good because you might have more guys out at that point in the year. But outside of that, like it's a fun thought to kind of backload the division games. It is brutal though for us because our division is so good that like we better be like pretty well off record wise by the time we get to week 11 or else it might be rough down the stretch. So.
Yeah, you got to take care of things in the first half of the season for sure. All right, let's talk about the last game that we know of, Shayne. Week 17, the Steelers playing the Kansas City Chiefs, 2-time back-to-back Super Bowl champions on Christmas Day. That we don't know exactly what time. There's a doubleheader on Christmas, and we'll find that out soon. So this is a game that's just impossible to expect the Steelers to win. I actually went back and looked. The Steelers have not beaten Patrick Mahomes. The last quarterback they beat with the Chiefs was Alex Smith.
Right.
They're 0-3 in their last 3 contests. They've been outscored 120-68 in 3 games. They're allowing 40 points a game to Patrick Mahomes' Chiefs. That's not encouraging at all. And you hope that, that number gets cut in half this time around. I don't want to spend Christmas like that, Shayne. That's not going to be fun. That's not a good gift for me.
This is the game when I saw, I was like, oh no. Because I'm like, first of all, I don't want to play on Christmas. No, I don't know what other fan bases feel like. I don't want to watch my team on Christmas because you have a 50-50 shot roughly depending on like your team and how good they are versus their opponent, which for us, much less than 50-50 shot. But in general, like you have, give it 50-50 shot, you're gonna either have a great Christmas or a really crappy Christmas night or afternoon. And it's just like, man, I don't want to do that, right? But so we are though. They put us on there. And the Chiefs at the end of the day are pretty much our worst nightmare, right? Because they have an elite quarterback. So it mitigates some of the pass rush stuff. Our secondary is more at risk because they're going to find gaps in it more. Mahomes is one of the best scramblers in the league in terms of, especially is just being able to create space to throw the football and to get first downs when he has to. And you have one of the best play callers ever, really, with Andy Reid. So he can scheme up ways to kind of beat our relatively simple defense, and especially depending on the team we're playing, simple defense. It's just an absolute nightmare matchup. And all I could think of is that, 6 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns Mahomes threw on us, like his second season technically, but his first year starting. It's like, obviously we're a better football team now than we were at that point, but it's still just like, man, like it's just terrifying. I can't, what else do you say about it besides that?
Yeah, and even with the Steelers roster looking very different than it did in their last matchup, it's just so hard to get encouraged about this game, knowing that Mahomes has your number like he has everybody else's. But it does negate what Steelers do best, and that's their defense. Like their defense doesn't show up in these games, like they did in the first half of that playoff game where the Steelers got a defensive touchdown, 7-0 lead, and then everything fell apart. And so you expect that, and even if that's the thing is, even if things go right for 3/4 of this game, you can't count out.
Yeah, Mahomes. Know that it better be over.
Yeah.
That's the scariest thing is like we've seen, because it's one thing to be like, all right, well, we have a touchdown lead going in the fourth, defense is playing well, we can win this game. No one has ever been able to say that versus Mahomes. Like no team has ever been able to go in the fourth quarter with like especially a 1-score lead, even a 2-score lead. But like, what? I think we're good, guys. I think we can kind of just run this out and we'll figure it out. You can't do that. Ask literally any team that's played him in the playoffs, any team that's played him in a big game in the regular season. It just doesn't really work that way. Like outside of the Super Bowl against the Bucs, when he literally had 5 guys who can't play offensive line playing offensive line in front of him, no one has found the answer to stopping that. So it's hard to ask the Steelers to be the one to do that, but maybe.
Yeah, and if the NFL is taking me away from my family on Christmas Day, I hope it's not for like a 37-10.
It better at least be fun most of the game. Yeah,
make it a good game. Yeah, make it a good game for sure. All right, so if we look back, Shayne, at the spots that are we don't know of at this time is Week 11, Week 14, and Week 18. But we do know that at this point, all of these games, these are the 3 other divisional games. Those, it's going to be the games that we haven't mentioned here, the double up games, essentially, of the Browns, Bengals, and the Ravens, the other time that they play these 3 teams, which means that from Week 11 to Week 18, you're not playing a team with a losing record from last season, and you're playing the Super Bowl champion, and you're playing the Eagles, and you're playing the Ravens, who had 13, 14 wins last year. So you're playing them twice. Man, it's rough. This is so the more that I look at this now, and we'll dissect it further next week, but they've got to have a really good record before the bye week. Those first 8 games, you've got to come away. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know what record, Shayne, just off the top of your head. What do you think they need to go in the first 8 games of the season in order to give themselves a real fighting shot for the playoffs down the stretch? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
So if I'm looking at this,
5-3, like at the absolute worst.
At the absolute worst, yeah. I think more realistically, you probably got to be 6-2. I think if you come out of the bye week, go into Week 10, and you beat the Commanders, let's say you're 6-3 or 7-2, right? That makes you need to get 3 wins then to have a shot at the playoffs, probably down the stretch to get to 10. That's kind of the magic number of playoff contention in the AFC, I think.
Yeah.
You have all your division games, so you just got to go. All you really have to do then is go 3-3 in those games, which I think is obviously very realistic just because it's the Steelers. But that schedule is
and I will say 10. You're not guaranteed to get in 10 with.
No, that's just to get you into the conversation. Last year we got to 10 and we, I think like just looking at the missing games, I assume Week 11. We already saw maybe could be the Ravens, which would make sense. Ravens, Browns, and then I think it's Browns, Bengals, Browns. So you go.
It would have to. I don't think they'd play the Bengals in back-to-back
exactly.
weeks. So it's gotta be
Browns.
So yeah, that's got to.
And then Week 18 would be the Bengals. Then I assume. So you finish off with them, which that could be a play-in game essentially, right? That might be like, all right, whoever wins this game goes to the playoffs, and whoever doesn't. Like that could easily be the case. Especially if the Ravens do win the division again, and they kind of have that locked up. It could be the Bengals and Steelers, could be the Browns too, playing another game somewhere else that they're trying to, the AFC North is just kind of insane. Like the North divisions in general now, especially with what, Minnesota kind of upgraded. Hopefully they hope long-term a quarterback, Caleb Williams joining the Bears. Like that division is the North runs the league. Let me put it this way. That's kind of my opinion in terms of like what divisions are the best overall. So we're definitely in for a tough stretch if that's how it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would not be surprised at all to see this be one of those scenarios again where we're entering week 18. Not only do you need a win in week 18, but you also need outside assistance like the Steelers were able to get from the Tennessee Titans last year. So I'm hoping it doesn't come down to that, but we will see.
Yeah, so we have a couple of fun chats that we can finish off with. I hope we catch the Eagles with Hurts banged up and assume stink it. I like that. Beats out McKee for number 2. Yeah, maybe we'll see.
That would be fun.
Yeah, Hurts definitely the way he plays, he could definitely be banged up. And then how many road games in the back half? I would have to look again. But so their home games after the bye would be Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincy, and Chiefs. Yeah, that's not awesome. That's not great.
It's
not gonna lie. But hey, you get what you get. You got to work with the schedule you get. I will admit, you're not trying to go back on. Yeah, it's
6 road games after the bye week. So.
That's great. No, but I think as much as this schedule is difficult, I'll give ESPN a little bit more leniency for their prediction, because looking at the schedule, I would have a hard time. Like,
I get it,
projecting a ton of games. But at the same time, like, this is what this team does, right?
They just do it. They just do. I don't know how, but they do. So it's got to break at some point, right?
Yeah,
that streak is got to end
at some point.
But knowing how much pressure is on right now, I mean, Art Rooney he can't go another. Like, I honestly don't know. Like, I don't know what job security looks like for everybody.
I have no idea.
Go a 7th consecutive year without a playoff win. Like, you just, I
have legitimately no idea.
Doesn't seem possible.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting for sure. It's going to be a fun season. I mean, there's a lot of interesting games on the schedule this year for sure.
What's going to happen though, Tommy, I'll just throw this out there, because we know is they're going to start off like 3-5, right? And we're going to be like, season's over because of that backstretch. And then they're somehow going to go like 6-2 in those games for no reason whatsoever. They'll win like all 6 of the division games for some reason, and then like lose the Eagles and Chiefs, and like everybody's like, they're kind of fraud still. I'm like, well, we got 9 wins, 10 wins though. We got like, that's how it's probably going to go, just because that's how it goes.
They'll end up getting to our record prediction, just not the way that
not at all. It never is.
Not
they
the way
always
that we
get within like a game of our like record predictions, just in none of the ways that we thought they were going to.
Exactly. All right. Next week, when we do this show, we will have all of the details ironed out. We can go into further detail with this. We'll break down some of the biggest storylines from the schedule, their primetime games, and more updates from that. We're also going to give our scouting report on wide receiver Roman Wilson next week, and give a bunch of player comparisons for him as well. So make sure that you join us for that, and we'll see what other news drops between now and next week. Thank you for joining us on the show. We go live every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube, or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.